Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. Only the key answers, rephrased questions, and our commentary. Breaking news. A war of words between Trump and Medvedev has just spilled beyond social media. Trump has ordered nuclear submarines closer to Russia. How dangerous is it when online insults escalate into real-world military action? Is this a strategic show of force or a reckless emotional move that could destabilize global security?
I think it's curious. I mean, like you, it's the first time that I've seen it, Danny. But what were you going to do with those nuclear submarines? Nuclear submarines have 2 or 3 capabilities. So you've got SSBNs, which are the ballistic missile submarines. Now, clearly, well, I hope that Trump isn't planning on using ballistic nuclear weapons, because that's the end for all of us. You know, the Russians will respond to, their doctrine is to respond to any nuclear attack, and frankly, that'll be end for probably the world. That then leaves you the next set, which are conventional nuclear submarines, which are armed with torpedoes, but also medium-range missiles. So these are Tomahawk, for example, and those sorts of things. So you could actually say, okay, well, we'll actually put an SSGN as how we used to describe them, but they're pretty much the same things now. And that they're able to fire a batch of Tomahawk missiles. Again, though, that's a very, very tricky thing to do, because as soon as you fire missiles, and Tomahawk can be nuclear tipped, as soon as you fire a missile which could be nuclear tipped into Russia, their doctrine is to respond with nuclear weapons. So, you know, it's a massive, if you're going to take the risk of doing that, you know, it's a unconscionable risk in my mind to do that. I mean, the last thing you could say, well, we'll use nuclear submarines to just sort of blockade Russia, or sort of put pressure on their merchant fleet or surface fleets. But the Russians have got submarines as well. And furthermore, the Russians have got submarines which include nuclear torpedoes. So you could fire a nuclear torpedo from some distance off continental USA, and the next thing you know, you've got a nuclear torpedo going off in an American port if you decide to move that way. So, you know, to me, this is for somebody who is not short on inflammatory comments, to actually suggest that because somebody else has responded to his inflammatory comments with the same, that he's going to use nuclear submarines. Well, I would ask, for what purpose? I can tell you that nuclear submarines of any type will make no significant difference to the battlefield.
Steve Jermy raises a deeply unsettling but crucial point. What exactly is the purpose of this order? He makes it clear none of the nuclear submarine types make strategic sense in this context. Ballistic missiles? That's mutual annihilation. Cruise missiles like Tomahawks? Russia's doctrine treats those as nuclear threats. A naval blockade? Russia has nuclear torpedoes, and they can hit U.S. ports. But the most alarming part isn't the technical breakdown. It's the political theater on the edge of madness. As Jermy puts it, this is an unconscionable risk, apparently triggered by a war of words on social media. This isn't strategy. It's an emotional outburst by a man who confuses Twitter with the nuclear football. And that leads to the real question. If there's no filter on the words and no purpose behind the orders, what stands between Trump and the launch codes? This isn't just tough talk. This is a threat disguised as a bluff. And in nuclear politics, bluffs aren't poker. They're Russian roulette. The back and forth between Trump, Medvedev, and Graham has escalated from trolling to nuclear-tinged threats. How dangerous is this rhetoric between nuclear powers, especially if words turn into real-world actions? And how might Russia respond?
What I suspect is that, Medvedev has always been publicly much more fiery than Putin. And what I suspect, I mean, Putin's in charge, and I suspect that the response will be measured. The Russians can respond. I mean, they can actually station nuclear submarines off the coast of the continental USA, and indeed, whether on both seaboards of the USA, and that's well within their capabilities. And I doubt that that Putin will go that far. I think he'll see this as a storm in the X or whatever teacup, I would like to think, and just get on with what he's doing. But the Russians are very capable of responding. Furthermore, they're also capable of responding in a way which the West can't match. So the Russians don't need to use nuclear weapons to damage the West in ways which we can't respond. With Iskander missiles, with hypersonic missiles they've got available, Gary, we can't defend against those. Yeah, we can't defend American bases scattered around the world against these missiles. We can't defend NATO bases. So, yeah, we've got to be super careful. I find it really difficult to understand that some of the military advice, which I assume is being given to, for example, NATO countries, and seems to be wanting to double down, isn't taking account of these critical vulnerabilities. I wrote about this, I think, about 4 or 5 months ago, in which I explained that NATO would lose a war with Russia. These vulnerabilities haven't been changed, and they won't be changed for at least 5 years, and I doubt we will ever catch up. So I think this is really a person with a weak set of cards actually sort of getting angry because somebody with a very strong set of cards is saying that we're not going to be bluffed by you. We are going to achieve our objectives on the battlefield. We know that we can't achieve them by diplomacy, and whatever you say, this is what we're going to do. So question now is how the West deals with a situation in which we can't stop the Russians achieving their objectives on the battlefield without an escalation which would take us into an even bigger defeat.
At the UN Security Council, Ambassador Lansky claimed the war could have ended early through diplomacy, that a deal was once on the table. But now with Russia rejecting talks outright, do you think this is just political posturing or a clear message that they intend to win solely on the battlefield?
I think it's something else. It's similar, but not quite the same. I think the Russians are not saying there's not going to be any diplomacy. I think what the Russians are probably saying is there hasn't been any diplomacy. There haven't been any meaningful debates at all. We've had situations where we've had peace conferences at which the Russians haven't been invited. I mean, how diplomatically incompetent is that? And it's unbelievable that one of the parties and the powerful parties to the campaign has not been invited. And there's as Ian Proud, you and I both know well, has said, we've sort of we make a great celebration out of not having diplomacy with the Russians, despite the fact that we talked to the Russians throughout the Cold War. It's a level of diplomatic incompetence which I think is almost impossible to believe. So I think that the Russians, though, have sort of thought to themselves, well, okay, and I think I've been saying this for about 4 or 5 months now, but I think Putin has said, keep going to the Russian general staff. They will have a strategy. I think I've got some ideas of what the ultimate objectives of that strategy will be. But keep going, and if we do get a good offer from the West, then we can perhaps talk. But until then, we will keep going, and we will achieve our security objectives on the battlefield because it's impossible talking to the West.
Steve Jermy makes a sharp observation. Russia hasn't rejected diplomacy. It's simply been excluded from it. Peace conferences without one of the main parties involved? That's not diplomacy. That's political theater. As Jermy puts it, the current level of diplomatic incompetence is almost unbelievable. And let's be honest, the West seems to have turned ignoring Russia into a virtue, as if refusing to talk is a strategy in itself. During the Cold War, diplomacy persisted even under the shadow of nuclear threats. Today, there's no real dialogue, not even the attempt. Now to the core of Jermy's point. In his view, Putin has made a strategic decision to press forward militarily. The Kremlin is pursuing its goals on the battlefield and will only consider negotiations if the West presents a serious offer. Until then, it's war. And here's the uncomfortable truth. when one side sees diplomacy as dead and the other doesn't even notice its absence. Escalation becomes the default path. Draw your own conclusions. We'll be watching how the situation unfolds. Thanks for watching. This was W Report.